Welcome to a Prevent Connect podcast, where we explore the prevention of violence against women. This is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
Hey everyone, it's a pleasure to be here this afternoon. It's funny because when I first became a parent or found out I was going to be a parent, I always swore I would never be the one who would just talk and talk about their kid. But today, in fact, that's exactly what I'm here to do, is to talk to you about my baby. Actually, two of my babies, if we're being perfectly honest. But let me back up and start from the beginning. My name is Pamela Mejia, and 6.5 years ago, this was me. I was 7 months pregnant. I had found out I was pregnant a few days after starting a new job at an organization called the Berkeley Media Studies Group, where I was a research associate. And I felt what I think are pretty typical emotions when I found out I was pregnant. I was elated, I was nervous, I was fearful. I was really fearful. I think the first project that I started at BMSG was maybe not the best one for a fearful new mom, because I was researching how the news talks about child sexual abuse. And I remember that every day I would come home and I would say to my rapidly expanding belly, "Don't come out. You're safe in there." Because what I was reading, what I was coding, what I was studying, this endless series of stories about horrible crimes and consequences made me feel like child sexual abuse, sexual violence in general, was just an inevitable fact of life, a foregone conclusion that I and my unborn daughter would have to deal with. That it was never something we could eradicate, eliminate. Best, we could just deal with the fallout. "So stay in," I whispered again and again. But she didn't listen to me. She never does. In fact, my daughter was born in March of 2011. And a few months later, I, lucky me, started another project on child sexual abuse in the news. This one was looking at the news about child sexual abuse in the aftermath of Jerry Sandusky's arrest at Penn State University. And here again, terrible things had happened. But now the conversation seemed like it had shifted a little bit. The news now went beyond just talking about individual crimes and punishments, consequences. It's talking about child sexual abuse not as an inevitable fact, but actually as the end result of an institution and a group of people failing to take action to protect children. And that, by definition, meant that sexual violence wasn't inevitable, that it could be prevented with various steps and institutional and individual changes that could keep that harm from ever happening in the first place. And for the first time since I'd started doing this work, I began to think that maybe sexual violence wasn't just a fact of life that I had to accept. I began to feel hope that in addition to supporting survivors, we could also ensure that there would now be no more survivors because the violence would not have to happen in the first place. Again, it gave me a little much needed hope. But the question then became, all right, well, I had this change. How could I make that change visible for others? How could I and my organization and all the colleagues I was being lucky enough to work with, how could we make sexual violence prevention as visible as violence and its consequences seem to be? My daughter was about 2 when I got the chance to start exploring what that might look like. Berkeley Media Studies Group began a 5-year-long collaboration with the National Sexual Violence Resource Center. We were going to explore questions like, how can people who were doing the critical prevention work that had changed my perspective, how could they get better at talking about that, making it visible to everyone? What would it take to show that sexual violence can be prevented across the lifespan? And not only can it be prevented, it is being prevented in communities and institutions, families and schools across the country and around the world. What would it take? What were the stories and the storytellers who could show that we all have a stake in prevention? What would help move hearts and minds to the place where I was getting to, where I saw prevention as not only possible, but achievable and vital. I often think of my work on sexual violence prevention at BMSG, and this project in particular, as my second baby. Because just like my first baby, I've gotten to watch it grow and shake shape and change in new and sometimes very unexpected ways. The first piece of work was another news analysis, this one of sexual violence across the lifespan in the news. We wanted to understand better how the public and policymakers understand prevention. And what we found is, through the news, they didn't. Just as I'd seen before, prevention of any kind was largely absent from the news coverage, which again was just that series of stories about crime and punishment. A little disheartening, but I also got to go around the country to rooms just like this one, in fact, where I met many of the people in this room, conducting interviews and listening in at meetings where experts and practitioners, preventionists and community residents talked about their work, what prevention meant to them, the stories they thought deserved a wider audience, the values that motivated them in what they do, the questions they still had. And there, I was lucky enough to collect stories and forge relationships that showed a different world. A world, again, where sexual violence was not only possible, achievable, but it was happening. And it was happening in a lot of really unexpected and powerful ways. Then, last year, BMSG began working with Goodwin Simon Strategic Research, a public opinion firm, to start testing some of those ideas and frames and themes that had come out of our earlier conversations and studies, to learn what moves people's hearts and minds, their ballots, sometimes their wallets, towards supporting prevention, engaging in prevention, doing prevention wherever they are. And just like with parenting, where I learn something new every day, so too I do in this work. Recently, for example, we conducted focus groups with staff and administrators from youth-serving organizations and college campuses. And there, I'll confess, I was really startled to hear participants push back against some of the frames and the phrases that I'd come to take for granted. Not just politically loaded terms like rape culture, but concepts I thought as neutral and inoffensive as responsibility or mandate. I heard people who work on the ground or in the trenches every day push back, questioning whether prevention was possible, whether sexual violence could ever really be eradicated, whether this work was all just a big waste of time. But I also heard people connect powerfully and passionately with stories about administrators, staff people, teachers, parents, young men and women, ordinary people from all walks of life who became champions of prevention wherever they are and whatever they're doing. I heard about the deep-seated values of love, community care, stewardship, and respect that drive people to do their work. And I learned how they connect to those values with preventing sexual violence across the lifespan, indeed with preventing violence in all its forms. Each piece of that work is helping us uncover how to describe concretely and effectively what prevention can look like. We're figuring out how to help other people make the change I've been lucky enough to make to see prevention as possible. I'm standing here today, 7 years later, as the research director for the Berkeley Media Studies Group. And I'm tremendously proud and pleased of all we've done and continue to do as we move into the final year of this collaboration, but by no means the final year of this work. And I'm also standing here as the mother of an amazing 6-year-old girl. That's Frankie. She's strong and smart and vibrant and funny, and she puts up with me when I lecture her about unhealthy relationships when we watch Disney movies. I believe Frances Mejia is part of the generation that will end sexual violence, and that the work that I'm doing and the work that we're all doing in this room and beyond will make that possible. Today, here, in this room and beyond, in the Monte Carlo room, where I have my roundtable afterward, I'm looking forward to sharing more about what we've learned, to talking about next steps, ways forward, points of collaboration, to what it will take to make that vision a reality for my daughter, for her friends, for all our children, the children who are going to end sexual violence, the children who are the generation of change. Thank you.
Thank you for listening to this Prevent Connect podcast. Prevent Connect is a project of the California Coalition Against Sexual Assault, with funding from the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. The views presented on Prevent Connect are not necessarily the views of the United States government, the CDC, or CalCASA. To learn more about Prevent Connect, visit www.preventconnect.org. For more information about CalCASA's mission, or to show your support, visit calcasa.org. That's CalCasa.org.